Welcome back. 2018 saw plenty of recalls. There were over 1,900 food recalls in 2018, but that is still down from over 3,600 in 2017. And there were also 3 total E. coli outbreaks linked to leafy greens. We also saw recalls for millions of pounds of beef and turkey, also non-food items like cars and medicine. So what can we expect in 2019? Here to discuss all that much more is ABC7's culinary director Judy Gallagher, ABC7's consumer watchdog Jerry Zivick, and the founder of the food pharmacist Evelise Capo. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Now, Judy, I wanted to start with you. The statistics that we just heard said that, there were less food recalls in this past year than the one before, but still 1,900. That's a big number. So why are so many recalls happening?
It's a huge number, and we really need to take stock of what the item is that's being recalled.
Okay.
Recalling something like romaine lettuce is tremendous. It's a huge amount because the majority of restaurants and businesses are using, we know romaine is more nutritious than iceberg, which by the way has now gone up to like triple the price right now. But there is such concern because when it's infected, did it grow into the root stock, which there's no controlling it at all if it did, or is it something that can be washed off? And that's where the trade-off is, and it makes it very, very concerning.
Evelise, we see kind of some of the same foods that seem to be trending. I know there's been romaine lettuce outbreaks before when it comes to E. coli. What can be done to make sure that doesn't happen? I know Judy just said once it kind of gets into those roots, it can be difficult to kind of come back from that. What do we do for that?
Well, I think it's important to look at the root of the cause, and I think with especially with romaine, we saw it was due to being an irrigation system close to an animal feed operation. So as we increase animal agriculture, and it's really affecting also our produce because of the waste that's being produced by all of these facilities.
Okay. And Jerry, kind of switching gears a little bit, it's not just food being recalled. We've seen blood pressure medication, which was linked to cancer, infant ibuprofen being too strong for the people that it was marketed to. What, if any, regulations are being put on other companies other than just food when it comes to these types of recalls?
Actually, a lot of these recalls are stemming from a law that was passed in 2011. It was the Food Safety Modernization Act. And for the first time ever this year, the FDA issued a mandatory recall, and that was for supplements that were advertising they were doing something they were not. The recent ibuprofen recall was what's known as a Class 2 recall when the dosage wasn't necessarily accurate. It was a health hazard, but it wasn't a severe health hazard. So we're having a good result as a result of laws passed to really protect us.
Okay, that's good to know. Well, our conversation on recalls will continue, but first let's get a check on our first alert weather forecast with Chief Meteorologist Bob. Welcome back. We're talking about food recalls tonight, and here to join us we have ABC7's culinary director Judy Gallagher, ABC7's consumer watchdog Jerry Zivick, and the founder of the food pharmacist Evelise Capo. Jerry, I wanted to start this block with you. When it comes to recalls, we often think of food, but also there's home and appliance recalls. What can consumers look out for? I know this year the Vitamix was a really big recall because there were blades that were coming detached from it and causing issues with that. I know on consumerreports.org there were nearly 65 recalls listed this year for home and appliance recalls.
Well, it's not just home and appliance, it's car recalls,
right.
It's medicine, it's vaccines, cosmetics, and I think one of the biggest areas that's growing in terms of recalls is pet food recalls. There isn't a month that goes by that I don't see 2 or 3 different pet food recalls. December was just almost every day there was a different pet food recall. So what's nice is we have a system that's working, that companies actually are doing these recalls on a voluntary basis, because the last thing they want really is to be fined and be the subject of the FDA. So it's a system that's been put in place, and it's working better and better as time goes on.
Well, that is some good news there. Judy and I were actually talking about dog food recalls right before the show, and you had some good tips for consumers when it came to keeping your furry friends safe too.
Well, exactly, and we have a really wonderful vet, so we're constantly checking we know we have 2 different dogs on 2 different eating plans for their own health benefits, but you have to be careful. You might save a little money buying a bag of dog food that was treated or processed in a country like China, which is not regulated. And we don't want our dogs eating that. We certainly aren't going to eat it. It's the same thing. There's such little regulation before, and you're the expert, but there had been such little recall availability for our animals, and just changing their food slightly can really make them sick. So being ahead of that and incorporating your own organic cooking into your pet system, according to the vet, is a really good idea.
But what I think we all have to become our own investigators or detectives now. And I think what the viewers need to take away from tonight is they can do this fairly easily. They can go to FDA.gov and sign up for their emails and get an alert all the time as to whenever there's a recall. And don't rely, you know, ABC does a great job telling people about all the different recalls, but be your own advocate. Find out what's going on, because it may take the station a day or two to actually get it on the news for whatever reason. So if you get the emails, you know what's going on. We always have these negative things about technology. Well, here's something positive.
There you go. Well, that's a great question, because I know so many times I'm at the grocery store and I'm like, oh, it's just, for instance, the romaine lettuce. I'm like, okay, whatever, I'm fine. But you know, when you get back home and you're like, oh, wait, there is still a recall on this, or perhaps berries or something that you wouldn't really think about, and you just grab it off the shelves. What is the best way to stay on top of that? I know you said that one website offers text messages or emails. That's a great option, but is there anything else you all would suggest?
No, always know your source. It kind of really starts at that beginning of knowing your source. When it comes, I'm going to speak just directly on the food. So yes, there is a big chance, if romaine is being recalled across the country, that we better be very careful about things like blackberries, certain fruits that are coming in from other countries that have no sanitation levels. And we have some, I strongly feel not enough, but you have to be careful of that. I've always had this theory that when large groups of people get sick on a cruise ship, it's not just somebody had the stomach bug and they use the railings. A lot of it is they pick up their produce locally at port, and we don't necessarily know how that is being watered, how it's being cleaned, and how it's being packaged and serviced.
All right, well, we will continue to get more in depth on this conversation when we come back. Welcome back. We're talking about recalls with food and other items tonight. Here joining us, we have ABC7's Culinary Director Judy Gallagher, ABC7's Consumer Watchdog Jerry Zivick, and the founder of the Food Pharmacist Evelise Capo. Evelise, I wanted to start with you. We've seen some big names with items recalled: McDonald's, Kellogg's. They had their cereal, their Honey Smack cereal, CVS's nasal spray. How bad do these recalls hurt them, possibly financially? Or have you found maybe consumers just don't really think about it? They see it and they just kind of blow it off, maybe.
They have big pockets, so they really do very well with their advertising, and I think people, you know, they get shocked, but they easily forget, you know, as they get, you know, more advertising and things of that nature. But I think Judy really hit an important fact, and it's to really know your source, and especially when you're talking about produce, focusing on local and organic is always great, and especially here in Florida, we have that availability throughout the year. And so, you know, if you know who your farmer is and how they handle the food, and so that not only helps them, but it helps us as well.
Great recommendation there. Jerry, when it comes to the car recalls, we've seen major issues, especially with airbags have been in the news a lot lately, brakes, fire risks, door handles, doors that even come off. How should consumers keep on top of that when it's their personal vehicle? Should they be checking every year? Should it be a annual event, excuse me? Or what should they be doing when it comes to those recalls on their car?
I want to digress for just a second and talk about the cost of food recalls.
Okay.
The cost, it's been estimated that the cost of each food recall costs the company $10 million per recall. The cost of contacting the people, the cost of grocers getting it off their shelves, and these are hard fixed costs. And there's a lot of studies that said that if these manufacturers or food processors would use best processes, it's a lot cheaper than the cost of a food recall. And that doesn't even include the loss of goodwill, because, you know, people will stop using a product if they suspect it, or the loss of sales. So there's a real cost of that, plus the cost of how much more your insurance will be if there's a food recall.
Okay.
Now, with respect to car recalls, all you have to do, you can check on government, I don't know the exact .com, but there is a government website that you can check to see if your car is recalled. You just Google, whatever car you own and the year, and has it been recalled, and it'll just tell you right away. And that's something you should do on a regular basis. But with respect to that, a lot of times there are repair circulars that are issued by the manufacturers that aren't an official recall. So if you have a relationship with wherever you bought your car, you can call up and say, hey, are there any repair circulars that have been issued? And they'll be able to tell you. So, or you can try and reach out directly to the manufacturer of the car. Are there any repair circulars as well? Once again, you have to be responsible for your own safety and health.
Okay, does the nhtsa.gov sound familiar to you? Our producer kind of looked it up behind the scenes and said, or safercar.gov?
There's probably a number of different places you can get that information. There's always agency overlap with the federal government. So, and there's probably private email sites too that will provide that information.
Okay, and recalls.gov as well as another good one that we found on our website. Now, Judy, when it comes to the process of food recalls, we know we've got the FDA, we've got USDA kind of keeping regulations on this, but there's lots of lists. What goes into kind of making that food recall? What decision is first? What goes, dings the red flag? This is what we need to pay attention to.
Well, having the unfortunate experience several years ago when there was an outbreak of spinach and basil, I want to say probably about 15 years ago, I had the bad fortune of enjoying a nice lunch at an organic restaurant. And I got a parasite along with about 40 other people in this area. They took a month for them to control it. Of course, the first thing the doctor asked me was, where have you eaten recently? And as a food critic, that's a little bit hard when you have 6 meals a day. But so there's a bit of time actually that passes that's very important that we are infecting, that I shouldn't say we are infecting, but thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people can be affected. Romaine is the perfect example. I eat salads almost every day. Jacqueline, you and I talk about what type of salad of the day we had or we're going to make. And so though that's very important. But first of all, if the bag says it's pre-washed, hogwash, you need to wash your produce and all of it.
Well, we really just had a viewer ask me on my Facebook page who said, is that just nonsense or should you be washing your vegetables and fruit every time?
I'm telling you, you need to, because we were just talking about how food is handled in restaurants, and that's a whole nother segment that we certainly could do, but most definitely, I always use the rule of take out the scrub brush, it only takes a minute. I even wash oranges, wash the skin before I start to peel it, because I don't know what's necessarily on my hands or who's been touching all that. So you really have to think about it without getting yourself too paranoid about it. You do have to make special attention to it. And the minute you don't feel well, write down everything you ate, as awful as it is to think about it, because that will help them trace it.
That's some good news there. Okay. And let's see. We talked a little bit about the dog food recalls. So what are some of the best recommendations? We've talked about, the websites and all these different things, but when you're kind of making these conscious decisions for yourself, what should you be thinking, when you're going down the grocery store aisle and you're like, oh, I saw that recall, but maybe I'll be okay, or maybe I should just stay away from that until I see an update on it?
Well, I think you're right in that respect. Also use common sense. Is somebody that's stocking the produce coughing on the produce? Do you notice somebody that has just handled raw chicken for your part of your meal as you're going down the line, and then they're reaching for lettuce? Well, that's salmonella at its very least. So there are lots of things that we have to be careful of. And speak up. You can say that to your servers.
But you can certainly say that to the servers, but a lot of times when you'll do that, they give you a blank stare. It's like, why are you bothering me on things like that? So the problem is people don't have, most consumers really don't even have a basic knowledge anymore. They're relying upon our government to do the job for them, and they're relying upon the grocery store to do the job for them. And how many times have we all even walk through a grocery store and pick something up and without reading the expiration date, get home, this is expired
Yeah.
already.
Right.
You know, and so literally, you have to go through the store, and I'm sure Evelisa will attest to this. You have to read every ingredient on everything you buy and make sure that it's not past due. And like Judy says, wash. You know, you said not to be paranoid.
But
It can't hurt to be a little paranoid
think
on
about if
everything.
3 heads of romaine are sitting in one package in plastic, and let's just say they're coming from Mexico, because we get a lot of produce from Mexico. So let's just use that as an example. That has time to incubate in that package of 3. Whereas if I went to the farmer's market on Saturday, and Warden Farms, which has won award after award after award as an organic certified farm with great practices, it's worth the $2 more for the organic safe practices.
Elise, I wanted to ask you, when it came to salmonella and E. coli, some of the salmonella, I've seen some reports it's been in the cereal, it's been in Duncan Hines cake mixes. E. coli seems to be more closely linked to vegetables and fruit. What do you need to know when it comes to, you know, even goldfish, I think, had salmonella linked to it as well. What do you need to know when it comes to the difference between the two?
Well, and then going back to the source, because this doesn't really, I mean, we talk about plants, but really they don't contain Salmonella and E. coli. So it came from an animal, you know, or the feces at some point. So it's the handling, it's how we're managing, and not only that, but you know, thinking really produce is not the biggest source. Is really we have food poisoning with animal products, with the meat and the chicken, and not only happening at the restaurants, but also at home, like how they're handling the food. So focusing on more plants that are local, it's definitely a good idea. But also, you know, learning to handle things and wash your hands, and you know, not touch your mouth and your nose. And as we were talking before, there are other sources. You know, we handle our phones, and we're touching things all throughout. So being aware when we're eating and teaching our kids, that's also very important. So you know, it's a complicated topic. It's not really clear cut that can be solved overnight, but I think going back to that, you know, the root of the cause. And
And lastly, Jerry, I wanted to ask you, what can we expect in 2019, perhaps from a consumer standpoint? Maybe you mentioned that law that was put in effect a few years ago. Are there anything, and is there anything else that the government is doing to kind of ensure better options for us?
I don't really have the answer. So we have a situation now where the government is partially shut down. What's going on with the FDA? Do they have inspectors out there? And I don't really have the exact answer. Is that considered a necessary operation of the government? I don't know. I've researched and I can't get a complete answer. What's to expect? In theory, we should have more recalls because but most of these recalls are always voluntary. And you have manufacturers and producers and farmers trying to be vigilant to give us a safe food chain. So just because there's more recalls doesn't really necessarily mean our food chain is less safe. It maybe means that we're being more diligent.
All right, well, good. I will definitely see if I can maybe get to the bottom of that answer, because I think that is definitely a great question. So we want to thank all of our guests, though, for joining us tonight. ABC7's Culinary Director, Judy Gallagher, ABC7's Consumer Watchdog, Jerry Zivick, and the founder of The Food Pharmacist, Evelise Capo. Thank you all so much for joining us. When we return, Jerry Zivick will tell us how to avoid internet dating scams in our For Your Benefit segment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, I know you might think that the holidays are now in the rearview mirror, but there is another big one right around the corner, Valentine's Day. Many people nowadays are doing online dating to find maybe that special someone. But like with everything, there are ways to get scammed. Here to discuss ways you can avoid being scammed while using online dating is ABC7's Consumer Watchdog, Jerry Zivick. Now, you have a first tip for us. I know a lot of people, maybe in the new year, this is their resolution to find love. What is maybe a tip that you would offer for them?
Well, internet dating can be great, and I'm not here to say it's really bad, because a lot of wonderful romances have stemmed from internet dating. However, there are some risks. The FBI says that this is actually the largest area of fraud that exists. They say that there's over $230 million worth of fraud that goes on from internet dating, and it very well could be substantially higher, but people are embarrassed to talk about that. And people tend to think, well, maybe it's a middle-aged woman or man that's going to be the victim and lonely looking for love. But actually, anybody can become a victim of internet dating. It can be a doctor, a lawyer, a CEO, an entertainment mogul. So anybody's susceptible to it. So the first tip that I would give to somebody would be you have to be very skeptical. If you're asking a specific question and you're getting basically a generic answer, then they're basically using the same, answering all the questions the same and just changing the name of who they are or who they're addressing it to. So you have to be very skeptical whenever you meet somebody online. You can never be too cautious. I guess paranoia is the theme of the night. We have paranoia with food and paranoia with this. So that would be a first tip. Also, I think there's such good photo recognition technology out there now. So if there's a picture out there, take that picture and use photo technology to see if that photo actually matches up to somebody. And when you're talking about photos, if you're supposedly talking to a 45-year-old individual and they're putting out a picture of somebody that's 20 years old, that's a big red flag.
And some people might think that maybe looking into somebody that they've met online might be kind of creepy for some people, and they, might want to feel like they're looked down upon because they investigated somebody. Would you say looking into maybe somebody you think you might have a potential relationship with worth that extra effort to kind of look and see, maybe, is this person reliable? Is this somebody that seems to have things lined up?
Well, I think you have to do that whether or not it's internet or any other place you meet somebody. You have the ability now to check into somebody's background to see if, in fact, that person is who they say they are. It certainly is much more difficult if the person says that they're John Smith. If John Smith becomes, Google John Smith. There's how many hundreds of John Smiths. So then you have to then cross-reference it. Where did John Smith say he lives? Where does he say he go to high school? What does he say he does? And you have to pin this down. You can never be too safe on all of this. And the big red flag is if John Smith or Melissa Jones or whoever it is asks for money, that you should stop right then and there. And you never want to give them a chance to explain why they want money, because you're just going to give them a chance to give a more intricate story and a chance to reel you in on something like that. And if it's a relationship that's meant to be, you can say no to money, and it'll still survive.
All right, Jerry. Well, thank you so much for those tips. Well, Jerry Zivick joins us every other Tuesday for your benefit.